The sound of horses carries differently when it means death. It rides the wind before the dust, before the sun fully climbs, before a man has time to decide whether to pray or run. Sterling Rhodes would remember this morning for the rest of his life, because it was the moment the past came riding, back to collect a debt he never knew was still alive. Sterling was bent over a broken fence post, sleeves rolled, hands raw with splinters, when the ground itself seemed to tense beneath his boots. At first he thought it was thunder echoing through the valley, but the rhythm was wrong, too measured, too many hooves. He straightened slowly, one hand resting on the hammer, and turned toward the open land beyond his ranch. The morning sun sat low and blinding, washing the valley in pale gold, and through that glare came movement. Dozens of riders, their silhouettes cutting clean lines through the haze, advancing in perfect formation. Not scattered, not careless, disciplined, purposeful. Sterling narrowed his eyes, expecting ranchers, traders, maybe a sheriff's escort passing through. What he saw instead made his breath catch. War paint flashed in reds and blacks. Feathers stirred above braids and wrapped hair. Rifles and bows rested easy but ready. Apache warriors, an entire war party, silent as ghosts moving straight toward his land. It made no sense. Everyone knew the Apache were gone. Driven out, broken into reservations far east of here. Treaties signed at gunpoint, families scattered. This valley hadn't seen an Apache war party in over a decade. Sterling's hand drifted toward the rifle leaning against the fence, without conscious thought. But before his fingers closed around the stock, something stopped him cold. At the head of the formation rode a woman. She sat her horse like it was an extension of her body, straight-backed, calm, in complete control. War paint masked half her face, sharp lines that spoke of readiness for battle, but her eyes were uncovered. Dark, steady, locked on Sterling as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Those eyes hit him harder than any rifle shot could have. They weren't hostile. They weren't curious. They were searching, knowing, like someone finally standing where they were, always meant to be. The riders halted exactly 50 yards from his fence. Not closer, not farther, close enough to strike, far enough to show restraint. Sterling swallowed. Apache war parties didn't pause to negotiate. They didn't stand waiting for permission. If they came to finish something. Yet here they were, horses shifting, leather creaking softly, every warrior watching the woman at their front. Then she broke another rule Sterling had lived by his entire frontier life. She dismounted alone. No cover, no escort. She left her weapon behind, hands open and visible, and began walking toward him. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Sterling felt his pulse in his ears as she came, closer, details sharpening with every yard. Traditional Apache clothing blended with fitted leather, gear, practical, modern. A scar ran from her, left temple down toward her jaw, pale against sun-darkened skin. His chest tightened. He knew that scar. He had cleaned it himself once, hands shaking, praying he wasn't already too late. She stopped just outside his fence and looked at him for a long moment before speaking. Sterling, she said his name softly, but it landed like a blow. Not as a question, as recognition, as memory carried for years. Sterling felt the world tilt. 15 years collapsed into a single breath. He knew those eyes. He had seen them fever bright in lamplight, heard their owner whisper half-remembered words while clinging to life. "You remember," she said, watching the truth reach his face. Her English was flawless now, smooth and controlled, barely touched by accent. "Good, I wasn't certain you would." "Ayanna," he breathed, disbelief and something like awe tightening his throat. She nodded once. "You saved my life." She gestured behind her, and only then did Sterling truly see the war party. Different markings, different styles, different weapons. Not one tribe, many, united. "These warriors are not here for blood," Ayanna said. "They are here for justice." Sterling exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something colder and more dangerous as she reached into a leather pouch and withdrew a folded document bearing wax seals. 3 days ago, she continued evenly, "Elias Wittman filed a legal claim against your ranch. He says you owe him $800 for supplies borrowed 2 years ago." Sterling's jaw hardened. "That's a lie." "I know," Ayanna replied. "I have spent 2 years uncovering his methods. You are the 17th family he has targeted. The ground felt unsteady beneath Sterling's boots as realization spread. This wasn't coincidence. It was culmination. Ayanna explained calmly, methodically, laying out forged documents, bribed officials, ruined families. She told him about the others, about what Wittmann had done, and about the single mistake he made.
He chose the man who saved my life, she said.
That debt does not go unpaid. She revealed documents, testimonies, ledgers, medical records kept by Dr. Harrison's father. Each revelation peeled away another layer of the world Sterling thought he understood. Harrison's betrayal, Wittmann's vengeance, the plan to destroy him publicly, legally, permanently. And when Ayanna spoke of alternative justice, of warriors waiting in the hills, Sterling saw clearly what she had become. Not just a survivor, a strategist, a leader, a force shaped by two worlds and loyal to neither injustice nor fear. By the time dawn came the next day, the plan was set. Ayanna vanished into the hills with her people, leaving only silence and resolve behind. When Wittmann arrived with Sheriff Morrison and Dr. Harrison, confidence dripped from him like oil. Sterling played his part, offering coffee, watching carefully as the extract took hold. Pain revealed priorities. Harrison hesitated. Wittmann pushed forward despite illness. And then Ayanna stepped from the barn with evidence, sharp enough to cut through years of lies. What followed unfolded like a reckoning long overdue. Medical records proved Sterling saved a child. Ledgers proved theft. Families arrived, 16 strong, carrying proof, memory, and quiet fury. Harrison's false diagnoses crumbled. Wittmann's forged empire collapsed under its own weight. Sheriff Morrison saw clearly, perhaps for the first time, the rot beneath his badge's authority, and he acted. Arrests were made, orders nullified, justice reclaimed. Sterling stood watching as chains closed around men who had believed themselves untouchable, feeling something ease inside his chest that he hadn't realized had been tight for years. Months later, the valley breathed easier. Farms restored, names cleared, and Ayanna returned not as a warrior demanding repayment, but as a woman building something lasting. Partnership replaced debt, purpose replaced survival. On the porch where fear once stood waiting, plans took shape beneath open sky. One act of compassion had rippled outward, reshaping lives, redrawing lines between people who once stood divided. And as the sun climbed higher over land finally at peace, Sterling Rhodes understood that some debts of honor don't end. They grow, they transform, and they become the foundation of futures neither side could have imagined. When the world was smaller and fear was louder, the valley did not heal all at once. Justice rarely arrives clean or quick on the frontier, and even after the arrests were made and the shackles closed around Elias Wittmann and Dr. Harrison, the air around Sterling Rhodes' ranch stayed tight with unfinished business. Paperwork followed bloodless battles, and truth had to fight its way through offices, courts, and men who had grown comfortable looking the other way. In the days after that morning, wagons came and went from Sterling's land. Families camped nearby, some sleeping under canvas, some under the open sky, unwilling to leave until they knew this time the outcome would be different. Ayanna remained close, no longer hidden in the hills, but never careless. Her warriors stayed out of sight, watching roads and ridgelines, reminding anyone tempted to interfere that this reckoning was not fragile. Sheriff Morrison spent long hours reading, questioning, comparing documents until his eyes burned. Each new page confirmed what his instincts had already accepted. This corruption ran deep, and stopping it would cost him friends, favors, and possibly his career. But he kept going. For the first time in years, the badge on his chest felt heavy in the right way. Wittmann's illness passed within hours, but his confidence never returned. When questioned, he spoke less, calculating more, realizing too late that intimidation failed when witnesses stood together. Dr. Harrison broke faster. The weight of his father's notes, the clerk's journal, and the testimony of ruined families pressed down until denial cracked. He tried to bargain, to reframe himself as misguided rather than malicious, but the facts left no room for mercy. Ayanna watched it all with an expression that was neither satisfied nor cruel. This wasn't revenge. It was alignment, truth finding its proper shape. Sterling moved through those days like a man relearning familiar ground. He answered questions, produced receipts, told his story again and again, including the night 15 years earlier when he carried a dying child from the creek and chose to help when fear would have been easier. Each retelling stripped away old doubt until the truth felt solid under his feet. Ayanna stayed nearby, translating when needed, clarifying when officials misunderstood, correcting lies before they rooted. She spoke with calm authority, never raising her voice, never begging. Men listened because she knew exactly what she was talking about. When territorial investigators finally arrived, they came prepared for resistance and found instead an organized record of crimes laid out neatly, cross-referenced, undeniable. The clerk's journal became the spine of the case. Harrison's father's medical notes became the moral heart of it. The trials moved faster than anyone expected. Public pressure mattered. 16 families sitting together in court mattered. A sheriff willing to testify mattered. Whitman's network unraveled. As names were spoken aloud and no longer protected by silence. When the verdicts came down, there was no cheering, just a long collective exhale. Imprisonment, removals, restitutions. Land titles returned. Deeds corrected. For many it felt unreal, like waking from a bad dream and needing time to trust daylight. In the weeks that followed, Sterling helped where he could. Lumber shared. Horses lent. Meals cooked. He watched barns rise again, fences reset, smoke returning to chimneys that had been cold for years. Ayanna moved between camps and homesteads, advising, listening, reminding people that rebuilding was also justice. When the last family packed to return home, the valley felt different. Quieter, but fuller. Sterling stood alone one evening at the fence where everything had begun and found Ayanna beside him, silent as she always was when words weren't needed. "You could have left," he said finally. "After the arrests." She shook her head. Justice doesn't end at the courtroom door. They spoke then of the future, cautiously at first, of work that remained, of systems that could be changed instead of merely punished. Ayanna told him about letters she'd written east, about connections made quietly, about the possibility of formal recognition for the work she'd been doing in shadows. Sterling listened, realizing the frightened girl he once sheltered had become someone who reshaped the ground. She walked on. When the offer came from the territorial capital, it didn't surprise him. What surprised him was her hesitation. She spoke of offices and ink and long hours indoors, of how easy it would be to lose touch with the land that anchored her. Sterling understood that fear. He offered partnership not as rescue but as balance, a place to return to, a future that didn't require choosing between worlds. When she accepted, the agreement felt older than paper, sealed by history rather than ink. The ranch changed slowly after that. Horses bred with care, trade done fairly, neighbors consulted instead of exploited. Ayanna rode often, sometimes for days, sometimes returning before sunset, always bringing news, ideas, connections. The Confederation remained, quieter now, more watchful than martial, a reminder that unity forged for justice didn't dissolve when the fighting stopped. One morning, as Sterling watched the sun lift over land that finally felt whole, Ayanna stood beside him, coffee steaming between them, and spoke softly of promises kept and promises still unfolding. The debt that brought her back had transformed into something larger than either of them. Not obligation, but shared purpose. Not repayment, but continuation. And as the valley stretched wide and open before them, it was clear this story had never been about war alone, but about what survives when compassion outlasts fear and justice is
carried forward by those willing
to stand together. The land remembered everything. It remembered blood and silence, lies buried shallow and truths pressed deep into its bones. Sterling Rhodes felt that memory most clearly, in the quiet mornings after everything had settled, when the valley woke without fear and the wind moved through, grass that no longer carried the weight of unfinished business. 3 months had passed since the trials ended, yet change still unfolded in small, deliberate ways, like a wound knitting itself closed. Sterling stood on his porch one morning watching light spill across the hills, the same hills that once hid warriors, prepared for violence and now held nothing more dangerous than grazing cattle and drifting hawks. His ranch was his again, not just on paper but in spirit. Reputation restored, name cleared, future no longer under siege. He heard a horse before he saw it and smiled without turning. Ayanna rode as she always did, easy in the saddle, unhurried, belonging to the land without claiming ownership over it. She dismounted near the fence where she had first spoken his name, that moment still sharp in Sterling's memory. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he replied, handing her a cup of coffee without asking. They sat in companionable silence, watching the day begin. News traveled fast now. Not carried by fear, but by curiosity and something like hope. Settlers spoke of cooperation instead of suspicion. Tribal leaders spoke openly with territorial officials for the first time without expecting betrayal at every turn. Ayanna told Sterling about the latest developments when silence finally gave way to words. The liaison position was becoming real, formal, recognized, a bridge between courts and communities that had never trusted each other. She spoke carefully, weighing each sentence, aware that accepting would change the shape of her days. Sterling listened, understanding more than she said. He had lived long enough to know that responsibility carried its own kind of confinement, even when chosen freely. You don't have to decide today, he said, or ever if it comes to that. She smiled faintly. I already decided. I just needed to be sure the choice didn't cost me everything else. They talked then about the ranch, about horses, about breeding lines that respected both traditional knowledge and modern methods. Sterling spoke of expanding carefully, ethically, without turning land into something hollow. Ayanna offered insights grounded in experience, in watching what happened when resources were stripped without regard for people. Their partnership felt natural, less like a business arrangement and more like an extension of a promise already kept. The Confederation remained a quiet presence in the background. Warriors returned to their homes, their fields, their families. But the network stayed intact. Information flowed. Warnings were shared. Protection took the form of preparation rather than threat. Ayanna visited often, sometimes alone, sometimes with elders or families who wanted advice, legal help, or simply reassurance that they were no longer alone. Sterling welcomed them all, his porch becoming a place where conversations mattered. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the valley in copper and gold, Ayanna stood at the edge of the property looking out across land that had nearly been taken from him. When I was 12, she said quietly, I thought survival was the end of the story. Just living another day felt like victory. Sterling waited, knowing better than to interrupt. But survival is only the beginning, she continued. What comes after is choice, responsibility, what you do with the life you were given. Back, Sterling nodded. I never thought that night by the creek would lead here. Neither did I, she said. But it did, because you chose compassion when fear would have been easier. They stood together, not bound by debt anymore, but by something steadier and stronger. Time passed. Seasons shifted. The valley filled with signs of life restored. Children laughed where there had been silence. Smoke rose from chimneys rebuilt by hands once broken by loss. Sterling watched it all with a sense of quiet pride, knowing he had played a part but not claiming more than his share. Ayanna accepted the liaison role eventually on her terms. She traveled often now, wearing neither war paint nor borrowed authority, but the confidence of someone who had earned her place. She returned whenever she could, grounding herself in soil and sky in the rhythm of hooves and the smell of coffee at dawn. On one such return, Sterling surprised her with a formal ledger, clean pages waiting to be filled. Equal partnership, he said simply. Shared decisions, shared profits. She studied it, then looked at him, seeing not the cowboy who once saved her, but the man who respected her. Partners, she said, extending her hand. They shook, sealing an agreement that felt older than law, older than land titles rooted in honor rather than ink. As the years stretched forward, their work became known beyond the valley. Disputes resolved before violence sparked. Fraud exposed before families were ruined. Cooperation replaced suspicion in places where hatred once felt inevitable. Sterling and Ayanna didn't claim credit. They simply kept doing the work, steady and unremarkable, knowing that lasting change rarely announced itself loudly. One morning, long after the scars of the past had faded into stories told by firelight, Sterling stood watching the sunrise with Ayanna beside him. The land lay open and peaceful, full of possibilities. Neither had dared imagine when this story began with a dying child and a frightened man making a single choice. You know, Ayanna said softly, I once believed repayment meant balancing a scale. Sterling glanced at her. And now I know some debts don't end, she said. They transform. They become responsibility. They become future. Sterling smiled, the lines at his eyes deepening. I reckon that's the best kind of debt there is. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of night, and the valley breathed easily beneath its light. The cowboy who helped a forgotten Apache girl learned that one act of kindness could reshape an entire world. And the girl who returned with warriors learned that true strength wasn't in how many followed her into battle, but in how many stood with her when the fighting was done. Together they stepped forward into a future built not on fear or revenge, but on trust earned the hard way, and on honor that refused to fade.